The story begins with several carriages stopping and soldiers preparing for battle. An army of goblin-like beings, wielding improvised weapons, rushes toward the carriages to loot them. However, all the mercenaries there stand in defense, ready to fight the monsters. The two groups charge at each other, and all that remains is a sea of blood from everyone involved in the fight. A bearded nobleman, watching the battle while smoking a cigar, complains because these attacks have been happening day after day. Distracted, the portly man does not notice that some beings are gathering behind him to attack. When he finally realizes it, he can no longer react. But for his salvation, a person with long hair charges at the beings to counterattack. A goblin tries to strike the long-haired man, but is immediately cut in half without even seeing it coming. With a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, the man defends against another monster's attack. He uses his shield to counterattack, hitting a goblin's head and sending it flying. Despite this, an enraged goblin still charges at our protagonist, aiming to kill him and avenge its companions. The irritated man stops using his shield for defense, freeing his hands. He immediately grabs the poor goblin's skull with one hand while holding its arm with the other. He exerts force to tear it apart, and then, in an extremely cruel manner, the man begins to rip the beast in half. The nobleman from before merely watches in shock, incredulous that the man had torn a goblin apart with his bare hands. His face stained with the creature's blood, the man continues to stare at the beast's body while the nobleman asks who he is. But before all this happens, we see a man working on a computer. Our protagonist begins to explain that he has always liked games since he was young and that it was not a sin. The world of games had various elements: a class system, poverty where the nobility reigned, betrayals and murders of close people or even strangers, and last but not least, numerous monsters and ferocious beasts that only think of destroying and killing. Our protagonist introduces himself as Don, a tall man with long hair dressed in medieval clothes. However, he clarifies that his real name was something else, remembering his life in his former world. But before he can state his real name, the scene cuts. We see him writing in a book with a quill, now in another place. He is in a carriage while the sun shines on his face, and he continues writing in his notebook. A bald and bearded man arrives and says it's time to change shifts. Don puts away his notebook and asks if anything has happened. The man replies that no, everything was very quiet, as not even a single goblin had appeared. They continue talking about the weather and why the creatures are no longer appearing while Don starts getting ready. However, the horse-drawn carriage passes over a stone, causing the bald man who was drinking to spit out his drink. Don finishes preparing, wishes his friend a good rest, and then leaves. The man wipes the liquid from his face, wishing Don good work. As Don leaves the carriage, he is greeted with "Good morning" by several people. We see that the carriages from before are arriving at a huge city. Don begins to explain that 2 years ago, he started the tutorial of this game. He informs that the starting point is known as the Bastion of Humanity and is called the Labyrinth City, Pagan. Looking at the immense castle and all the structures, he says that it was on a completely different level from what he saw on his computer screen. Walking towards the gates, he adds that it was a huge city with many people and also the only safe way to go to the underground labyrinth. Don says there is no other path that allows avoiding the monsters, and the labyrinth holds numerous treasures buried inside. He concludes that at the lowest part of the labyrinth, there is an object called the Stone of Wish that grants any wish. He thinks that this is probably his only way to return to his world, and to confirm if the stone really exists, he will need to descend to the end of the labyrinth. However, an unknown person catches his attention, calling him by his name from behind. The person was the same noble from before, who, upon being greeted by Don, said he didn't need to be so formal. As Don approached, it was noticeable that our protagonist was much taller than the man. The noble, Bulkma, mentioned that they were companions, and thus didn't need formality. Our protagonist assumed the man wanted something, and the noble was surprised, saying Don had a keen perception, which was why he liked him. With all his elegance, Bulkma said he had something to offer and asked if Don would be willing to join his emporium as his personal mercenary. Hearing this, Don was somewhat confused because he thought he had never seen such an event in the game before. Bulkma said his merchant instincts told him that although there were numerous superhumans in this labyrinth city, He was sure that our protagonist would soon be on the same level as them. The boy asked if the noble was trying to hire him before that happened, and the dwarf confirmed it, emphasizing that this would also be advantageous for Don. He asked once more if he would accept the offer. However, unexpectedly, Don refused. The dwarf then began to pull something from his jacket, saying he knew this would happen. He took out a bag of coins, stating it was the commission fee, 15 shillings. Don was confused, noting that his commission fee was 10 shillings, and he even thought he would receive less since he joined halfway. But Bulkma said the rest was an investment, concluding that he wanted to solidify his relationship with a talented warrior. Our protagonist smiled, and to finalize the negotiation, the dwarf asked Don not to ignore him in the future. Don accepted, saying it sounded good. The boy extended his hand to say goodbye, and Don returned the gesture, smiling and realizing that the man truly seemed like a good person. The conversation ended with a handshake. Later that day, as the sun was setting, several people walked through the streets of the Labyrinth City. Our protagonist was one of them, looking confused and immersed in his thoughts. He recalled the offer the noble had made, thinking that during his gameplay, he had never seen anything like it. This meant that the game's events could change depending on his actions. Don concluded that it was a very tempting offer, but he already had a predetermined plan. He continued walking through various streets, alleys, and suburbs, even passing through poor areas, and finally arrived at a place with a sign. He looked at the establishment and confidently said he had come to the right place, then walked to the door. Don opened it and, upon entering, saw it was a bar with many people talking and drinking. Some mercenaries were discussing their missions and laughing, while others were stressed, taking out all their anger on their drinks. Some were already drunk and sleeping. Looking at the whole situation, Don was surprisingly happy, saying this was definitely the place he desired. Walking and looking around, he began to explain that a little after the start of the game, something caught his attention. Looking to the side, he saw something shiny that surprised him. Our protagonist opened a malicious smile, showing some sharp teeth. The bright light he saw was a kind of ghostly, translucent corpse. A system screen appeared. You have discovered the pathetic soldier's corpse. The person had been killed there by dagger attacks. The system informed him that if he collected the body, he could inherit the abilities, skills, and items of the dead person. Smiling and staring at it, our protagonist began to think, wondering what the best weapon to deal with this ridiculously difficult game would be. He extended his hand, and all the green energy began to flow into his arm. He collected the corpse, vowing, "I will reach the end of this game, no matter what." We see our protagonist using a computer, saying he liked challenging games while adjusting his peripherals. He mentions he enjoyed controllability, commonly referred to as physics, and for that reason, he got bored with very easy games. However, this game was difficult even for him. He stared at his monitor and watched his character get shredded by a huge ogre. Looking at the game over screen, he adds that the main character was weak, and the monsters were extremely strong. The world inside the game was heading towards ruin. Every allied NPC was either seduced by demons or busy trying to stab him in the back. Drinking energy drinks to stay awake day after day, he says he died about 100 times but was determined to see the end of this game one way or another. A system notification appears, asking if the player would like to buy the selected items, giving the option of yes or no. Seeing this, our protagonist gets annoyed but says he will spend the money, wondering what kind of cursed game charges to reach the end. He moves his mouse to the yes button and clicks, adding that he would have uninstalled it if not for the amount of time he had invested. But in his current life, he bangs a mug of meat against the table, sighing that he should have just uninstalled that game. Looking to the side, he stares at the translucent corpse on the floor while other people continue drinking in the bar. Still staring at the figure, he says that luckily he was sure other people couldn't see it. This was called downloaded content, or inheritance, a feature where a new character could inherit the abilities of the main character who died in the last round. For players who died hundreds of times, this opened up the possibility of infinite growth. Leaving some coins on the counter to pay for his drink, he gets up, saying there was just one flaw in that system. You had to personally go to the place where a body died and collect the corpse yourself. As he stands up, facing the corpse, still hesitant and somewhat incredulous, he extends his hand. He uses the ability to collect the corpse, and then all the green aura begins to move towards him. Don is surrounded by the green aura, and as he absorbs it, his strength, proficiency, and everything he was entitled to begin to increase. However, something unexpected appears, and he gets a little confused. The system notifies him that he had discovered a skill called Demon's Armed Combat, and then informs him what that skill did. Looking at his hand, which held a purple energy ball, he closes it, using the skill, and wonders how that character had this ability. Ignoring this, he smiles, thinking about the possibilities this would give him. His business there was over, so he decided to leave. But a person sitting at one of the tables, a crime boss, turns their attention to Don. The crime boss says he had never seen Don's face and that he seemed like a mercenary, so he asks what brought him there. The man, Maroon, asks Don if he knew the business ethics of that place. A little drunk, the bandit says that the business ethics were a money fee that Don should transfer to him, the manager of that inn. Maroon continues, saying that as long as Don was there, he could eat and drink safely. Don interprets this as a threat. Hearing what the mercenary was saying, Don looks at a dagger in the man's pocket and recognizes it, remembering the corpse he had just absorbed. He recalls that this was the bastard who had killed him before. To the bandit's misfortune, Don says that unfortunately, he had no money to give. The man gets irritated, asking if he really had nothing. Maroon imposingly gets up close to our protagonist, staring at him with a murderous aura. His henchman, a muscular bald man, tries to go after Don, but Maroon stops him, saying he would let Don go. The bandit questions if Don had paid for his drink, and the boy confirms. Trying to act the good guy, Maroon says he'll make an exception and let him go. Don calmly turns to open the door, not noticing that behind him, Maroon has an extremely psychotic aura. The bandit begins to draw his dagger and, with a threatening aura, charges at our protagonist. Don seemed unaware of what was coming, only looking ahead as he was about to open the door. However, turning with an even more frightening aura, Don says, "I already knew about that," and counterattacks. Outside the bar, people are going about their lives normally. When everyone least expects it, the bar door flies open, and Maroon comes flying out from Don's strike, ripping the door off and being thrown far away. The bandit hits his head and back against the wall on the other side of the street, falling to the ground dazed. Don, cracking his neck, says he wouldn't fall for that failed tactic twice and curses the bandit. Still somewhat dazed and irritated, Maroon orders all the bandits inside the establishment to attack, and thus several armed people surround Don. One of the bandits, seeing Don's size, questions whether he was really a normal person. Don feels somewhat embarrassed, just scratching his face and looking around at all his pursuers. However, showing a darker side, he smiles, thinking there was a new skill and that this was a great time to test it. Without any fear, he drops his sword and shield on the ground, cracking his knuckles and intending to fight with his bare fists. In a haughty and mocking manner, he signals for all the bandits to attack him, provoking them. Seeing the man's attitude, everyone charges at him, stating he was arrogant. One of the bandits, wielding a small blade, leaps at our protagonist, shouting for him to die. But Don was merely concentrating a purple aura in his hand, waiting for the bandit to come into the lion's den. When the man was about to hit him, he opens his fist and immediately strikes the bandit's stomach. With the strong impact, the man is instantly repelled, thrown meters away, already unconscious. Seeing that, the other bandits, even finding it frightening, immediately charge at Don. Two of them have blades ready to kill him. A bald man tries to attack with a sword, but Don quickly dodges and then counterattacks, throwing the man away. The other bandit manages to land his attack with a wooden club, but realizes the club broke without leaving a scratch on his opponent. The bandana-wearing man, seeing it had no effect, wonders how a human's body could be as hard as iron. Don takes advantage of this distraction and also strikes the man in the belly with the back of his fist, knocking him out immediately. Seeing the bandits charging at him, our protagonist does only one thing. He smiles wickedly because he knew he could win. Maroon, who is completely beaten on the other side of the street, gets irritated, shouting that he pays the bandits to obey, so they should finish Dawn immediately. Even hesitating, upon hearing their boss's order, a blonde man attacks Dawn from behind, trying to stab him with a blade. However, before he could see it, Dawn immediately spins his body, hitting his opponent's chin squarely with his heel. While his partner falls to the ground, another bandit charges to attack with a dagger. This time, Dawn manages to defend himself just in time, creating a dust cloud. When the dust settles, we can see that Dawn managed to catch the man's dagger with his own hands, injuring his fist in the process. Immediately, while preventing his attacker's movement, he retorts with a full punch to the guy's face, who wondered how he had caught the dagger. Upon receiving the impact, the man also goes rolling backward, already unconscious. Dawn seems unhappy, complaining that it was crap and wiping the dust off his chest. He explains he was only trying to grab the man's wrist and that this must have happened because the skill proficiency was low. Looking at his stats, Dawn realizes his demon's armed combat skill had only increased by 1% proficiency, saying the game was damn hard. Looking back, a bald person appears, asking what Dawn had done. The bartender accuses Dawn, stating that he was beating people up in broad daylight, and that even if he was a mercenary, it was not allowed. However, our protagonist had no patience for conversation. Thinking the man was threatening him, he draws an axe. The bartender continues complaining, saying that if the guards found out, he wouldn't get away unscathed. Before he could realize it, an axe flies in his direction. The bald man only manages to see the object hitting near his head, becoming completely terrified. Our protagonist then apologizes, saying that it had slipped from his hand by accident. He walks up to the bald man, removing the axe that had gotten stuck in the wood. The boy remains nervous with a murderous aura and the axe in his hands. He asks the bartender what he was saying. At night, near a cabin, we see Dawn tossing a bag of gold into the air. He says that before threatening someone, you should know who your enemy is. Since the guy was the innkeeper, he had made a lot of money. As he walks through the city streets, he adds that with this, he could stay in a good place without worrying about anything. A few meters away, a receptionist welcomes our protagonist, saying that this was the Sword and Shield Inn. The man asked how long Dawn planned to stay because this inn even offers discounts depending on his mercenary rank. Dawn says he would stay for a week and pulls out a silver necklace from his pocket, informing him that he was a silver rank mercenary. The receptionist explains that since he was silver rank, breakfast and lunch would be completely free, but dinner would be extra, and the price of the room was 7 shillings. Looking at the bag of coins, the boy feels somewhat disappointed, thinking that it was still expensive. However, with few options, he leaves the coins on the counter and then heads to his room, number 412. Upon arriving there, he removes all his armor and weapons, placing them on his bed. He goes to the window to look at the moon and says that this was the true beginning, because the most important thing before completing the game was survival. Dawn continues immersed in his thoughts, thinking that to prevent this world from collapsing, he would have to become stronger. For that, he would need money and experience. But unfortunately, with his current equipment and skills, that would be practically impossible. He needed money to buy good equipment and had to level up to use the inheritance skill. Thanks to his countless rounds, the corpses of his characters are scattered throughout the entire continent, which would allow him to evolve exponentially. Clenching his fist, determined, he concludes that if he collected all the corpses, he could become extremely strong. Imagining the creatures in that world, he notes that time was short and he would have to prepare as quickly as possible. Thinking more deeply, he tries to find a special mission where he can earn money and collect corpses simultaneously. He finishes by saying that for this, he would have to meet the owner of the Raven's Nest. The next day, in another place, you can see an establishment with the logo of a raven. Inside this place, everything is illuminated by a purple light. On a table, there are various pieces of equipment, books, and magical potions. A beautiful girl rests her face on her hand while she says the name Dawn, reading some papers. We see that the girl was sitting in a chair near a table, reading a specific paper with information about our protagonist. The next day, the sun finally rises, shining on the whole hotel. The man in charge of the reception wishes our protagonist a safe journey, and Don quickly leaves. Looking around, still a bit confused, he asks himself if he should go now or wait for a more appropriate moment. He starts walking through the streets and suburbs of the city, heading to the location he wanted to visit. After some walking, he finally sees the Raven logo and says it looks like he has arrived. Looking at the establishment, he sees that everything was completely run down, even overtaken by vines. Don remarks that it was very neglected. Entering without asking, he asks if there was anyone there. It looked like a bar illuminated by a purple magic crystal. Searching the establishment, Don notes that the door was open, but the owner of the nest didn't seem to be there. Something catches his attention, and he diverts his gaze to a door, thinking it might be an uninvited guest. Behind the door, the same girl from the previous day was hiding with a crossbow. When Don notices this, he says he has to clear up the misunderstanding. He goes to the door he entered and knocks with a secret code that only he and a few specific people knew. Hearing this, the girl remains silent for a while, then sighs and realizes what it is. Before opening the door, she asks how many times she has to say it. And as she opens the door, she says that outside business hours, one should only come if it's urgent. Upon seeing our protagonist, she notices that he is much taller than her and comments that she has never seen him before. Sighing, Dawn says that she needs to expand her customer base to do well in business, as this place should be thriving. The girl remains silent, smiling with a hint of mockery. She explains that she is quite capable and that he talks a lot for a customer from the north. She rephrases and asks how a savage dares to hint at someone like her, then asks if he understands. Dawn confirms, saying it wouldn't be good if he were just a savage who migrated at the age of 2. The girl is a bit confused by the phrase. He explains that he was civilized from an early age and, unlike an informant, she wasn't very good at foreign languages. Hearing this, the girl laughs despite trying to hold it back, saying he is a disappointment. She apologizes, commenting that she didn't expect to be fooled in such a gentlemanly manner. She turns around smiling and walks back to where she was, saying that since our protagonist is a customer, he will be served tea. As she turns, Dawn notices she is holding a crossbow and feels a bit nervous, sweating. He thinks that his chest was almost pierced, but with a knowing smile, the girl simply ignores him. Inside, the girl serves tea to Dawn, saying that even if he has heard about her, they should introduce themselves. She introduces herself as Sienna, stating that she works as a simple informant for the Raven's Nest, but is actually the owner. Dawn introduces himself, saying he heard that he could accept various types of missions there. As she sits across from him, the girl confirms that he can take missions if he wants, but asks how he discovered the place. Dawn replies that it was Bulkma who told him, and he also said that if she offers alcohol, he could drink, but if she offers tea, not to drink it. Irritated, the girl says that Bulkma's tongue is too loose and asks if our protagonist saved his life, to which Dawn says it was something like that. She explains that the code he used to knock on the door is something only truly close people know, so she tried to take precautions. Dawn says that collateral damage is too great for a simple concern, but changing the subject, the girl asks if he wants a mission. She explains that she still doesn't know him, whether close to Bulkma or not, so this is the first time they're meeting. For now, the only thing she can do is give trivial missions, things that wouldn't have much impact on her business even if he fails. Smiling, Dawn says it's okay, since this is their first meeting, and the girl also smiles. Smiling, she says she should witness the abilities of the almighty warrior who tore apart a goblin with his bare hands. In another place, in a more remote part of the city resembling a slum, Dawn is seen reading some information on a flyer. He says that the girl is like a fox and that her "I don't know you yet" talk was all lies. From the moment he arrived in the city, she already had information on who he was. After some walking, he steps into a part of the city's sewer and notices something. This was the lower street in the Bronze Territory's outskirts. Realizing he was in the right place, he starts to analyze it. It seems there was an incident of missing people on that street, which is why he received the mission. Apparently, several disappearance cases have been occurring over an entire month in the same place. The boy begins to enter and search the area. It is also explained that these incidents happen every 3 to 5 days. Recently, however, a young man disappeared, so the criminal seems to be getting bolder. Our protagonist then enters the sewer. Looking around, Don comments that it was written that the last disappearance happened there, so he begins to investigate. Something catches his attention, and looking ahead, he sees the shadow of a monster talking about its stomach. The creature resembled a human but was walking on all fours, acting like an animal. Don draws his shield and sword, preparing for combat, but something catches his attention when he sees the monster. He realizes that this humanoid creature, which resembled a rat, was the bastard that had devoured one of his bodies. The system notifies that Don had discovered the body of the hunter who was devoured as a form of test. The system also hints that our protagonist could inherit the bodies that were eaten or absorbed by someone by defeating the target that consumed it. Don faces the beast and notices that the monster has various veins on its back and a monstrous appearance. Seeing this, he smiles, saying he wouldn't have imagined finding his target so quickly. He assumes he's lucky, and the notification explains that if he defeats the target and absorbs it, he will acquire the powers of the corpse the monster ate. Raising his shield to defend himself, Don comments that the monster is either a low-level half-monster or a low-level boss. Recalling his first battle against the beast, he notes that the rat originally had the size of an ogre and could easily destroy buildings. The creature, in a frightening manner, says it didn't have much to eat today and was hungry, since the small meals no longer satisfied its stomach. Taking a battle stance, Don comments that since it's the beginning of the game, it seems this creature is still developing. Realizing this, our protagonist says it's better this way since he wouldn't have to face the monster at its full strength. With a wicked smile, Don says he can cut the monster down before it reaches its strongest level. Irritated and without human consciousness, the beast charges at our protagonist. It runs towards Don with its sharp and gigantic claws ready to tear him apart. However, Don is already prepared and easily dodges the attack by stepping back. He takes advantage of the opening to quickly strike his opponent with a kick to the stomach. The beast is thrown meters away, its belly extremely damaged. The monster hits its head against a sewer wall, becoming severely injured and dazed. The creature turns to look at Don, and we see that the wound had crushed part of its skull. However, a disgusting pink slime begins to form on the wound, regenerating it immediately. Seeing that his enemy had regenerated, Don becomes extremely irritated, realizing the monster was still very strong. Quickly and without hesitation, the monster turns, ready to attack again. However, without mercy, Don uses his sword to try to cut the monster in half but only manages to leave a wound in its stomach. The furious beast screams in pain, while our protagonist realizes his attack hadn't been deep enough. Still groaning, the half-human monster contorts, trying to hold the blood pouring from its stomach. Seeing his enemy kneeling, Don raises his sword to finish him off. Unexpectedly, with tears in its eyes, the monster begs him to stop, claiming it was a person. Hearing this, Don is completely confused, asking if the monster is okay now. The person responds affirmatively, crying. The beast says it didn't do it because it wanted to, sobbing with tears streaming from its eye. It continues crying in despair, saying it didn't want to eat people and that a certain group of people put this beast inside him. Our protagonist asks who these people are. The monster responds that he doesn't know either. They wore black robes and masks. The monster adds that these people used some strange potions and spells to transform him. Don asks what the masks looked like. Still crying, the beast explains that they were made of gold with a smooth surface and a large painted mouth. Hearing this, Don remembers something and says that as time passes, these people will give him more headaches, so he better be prepared. Suddenly, the monster starts to despair, asking how they could do this to people. Don responds that it wasn't his fault, leaving the monster surprised. He adds that the people who turned him into that are the main culprits, so he doesn't need to worry. Don further states that he will make them all disappear. For some reason, the monster starts to writhe as he stands up. Our protagonist thanks him and sheaths his sword. Still in tears, the man says that those people fed him the flesh of his own daughter. As Don walks away, the monster continues talking about how they forced him to eat, consuming flesh, muscles, and intestines. But something changes in him, and his aura reverts to what it was, making him extremely aggressive and frightening. Saying he is hungry, the beast lapses back into madness and then tries to attack Don again, charging at him while his back is turned. Realizing what had happened, Don bites his lips, becoming extremely irritated, and draws his sword. Before the monster could reach him, as an act of saving it from this suffering, he turns and uses his sword to finish it off. The beast's head instantly flies meters away, while the half-human body falls into the sewer water. The system notifies him that he had eliminated the monster that had swallowed his corpse and thus had discovered a new body. Don observes his former corpse and the monster's body lying in the water, cursing the world, while the system asks if he wants to absorb it. We return to the Raven's Nest when it was already late afternoon. Inside, the beautiful girl, Sienna, asks our protagonist if he had returned to the inn. He enters the place with an irritated and downcast expression, so she asks if he wants a drink. Without much conversation, Don throws a bag on the table, stating that he had captured the man they were looking for. The woman opens the bag and, seeing what was inside, has a disgusted look but says nothing. She realizes that tearing a goblin apart wasn't a lie, and says she now has no doubt that his words were serious. Sienna takes a bag of coins from behind the counter and says that he did a good job paying him the 15 shillings. With a somewhat embarrassed face, she says he completed the job faster than she expected, but that doesn't mean he'll get more. Still saddened by the situation, Don says that amount was more than enough. He also pulls out another bag from his pockets and places it on the counter, leaving Sienna intrigued. With a cold expression, he explains that what's in the bag are the belongings of the murdered victims, leaving her confused. He explains that he wanted her to give it to their families. Don offers to pay, but the girl says she is not an informant who extorts money and that he could keep it. She would do it. Smiling, more relieved, Don thanks Sienna. He turns and begins to leave, saying he will see her tomorrow. Irritated, she responds that for the 10th time, he should come during business hours. Don retorts that he would think about it if she offered him a drink instead of tea and trying to kill him. Proud and somewhat happy, she sighs while watching him leave, realizing he had a good heart. She asks if it was really serious, since this wasn't the action of a typical mercenary who only cares about himself. Sienna also says that he doesn't seem like a man who would simply be driven by a sense of justice. Getting a bit interested, she sighs once more, saying that he's a very interesting mercenary. She says she is sure Don is capable of everything she commands. Already at night, we return to the inn where our protagonist was staying. He is writing in his notebook again. We discover that it was his diary, and he was reporting that he eliminated a demi-demon that would later become a disaster and even recovered a corpse. He activates his stats window, beginning to analyze it. He sees that he had already gained a new skill called night vision. Noticing that his stats had increased exponentially, he says that, as he thought, he should recover as many corpses as possible, as quickly as possible. This is the cost if he wants to repair the future world scenario that is approaching. There are various situations that will happen soon, such as a coven of witches who will burn a city and kill many citizens. There's also the mystery of the cultists, who are trying to do something and are hiding while conducting experiments. An army of vampires is invading the Empire, wanting to bring it to ruin. And finally, the evil god, the worst being that exists and the enemy of everything in that world. He remembers the monster talking about the masks of the people who did that to him. Don closes his diary with a bang, extremely irritated. Standing up, he says he will do what he can for now. The secret cult society of Palacin, if left alone, will eventually become a presence that cannot be ignored. But before that happens, he opens a wicked smile and adds that he will dismantle them, member by member, and defeat them. The next morning, we see the Raven's Tavern, where our protagonist picks up his missions. Inside, a bartender is cleaning some glass cups when something behind him catches his attention. Don arrives and sits on a small chair in front of the counter, asking the bartender for a glass of whiskey. The man quickly nods, rings a bell, and hands our protagonist the drink, which he quickly consumes. However, surprising him, Sienna appears, asking how long he will ignore the instructions to come only during business hours. Don responds that if there's a customer and a bartender, it's business hours, and the girl says he is talking too much. Our protagonist asks who he has to kill that day, but she replies that he isn't going to kill anyone. Sienna points to her office and says he needs to go in because they need to talk. He is a bit hesitant. not understanding what she meant. She turns and starts entering her office, saying that a specific job has come for a certain person. The girl calls him the low-path hunter, and then enters her office, laughing. Inside the office, Dawn asks who this low-path hunter is. Sienna, while serving tea, asks if he didn't know that was his new nickname because he was running through the low paths and alleys catching wanted people. She adds that it's no wonder he earned that nickname, while Dawn remembers the missions he's been doing. The woman also says that he spent almost every day of the last week doing work that others avoid because it's dirty and dangerous. Dawn retorts that there must be many other bounty hunters, but she replies that he was standing out. Changing the subject, the man asks about the job. The woman turns, going to the wall and picking up some papers. Shaking them, she smiles, saying that it's his present. Reading it, he looks surprised and says the phrase, "Magic Tower." Confused, Sienna confirms his suspicions, stating that the Magic Tower of Elgus, in the Fine Silver Zone, had hired him. She clarifies that she's not speaking for all of Elgaia, but for a specific, highly important mage. Dawn becomes even more confused, saying he's only been active for a week, so how did the Magic Tower know his name? The girl replies that one of her clients with high connections must have recommended him. Sienna says that to get the attention of the Magic Tower scouts, Dawn must have had an encounter with someone of high rank. She snaps her fingers, saying that someone comes to mind, a silent commander of the Bronze Guards Company. Hearing that, Dawn agrees, saying that's a good guess. Sienna adds that this man has connections with the Magic Tower and is someone she would also want as an ally. Dawn takes the tea to drink, asking for the details of the job. In the evening, Dawn is looking at something while being illuminated by the moonlight. The request was related to the missing disciple of an elderly mage from the Magic Tower of Elgus, who disappeared in the city sewers. As he walks through the streets, he says the reward would be a florin if he found any trace of him and double that if he brought him back. Smiling, he adds that mages treat their direct disciples like their own children, and if everything went well, the Magic Tower might owe him a favor. He was sure the tower would pay. As he walks, he mentions that Sienna had promised a qualified guide. Then, a figure surprises him, asking if he was Dawn, the low-path hunter. We see that the guide is a girl. With a smile, she says hello, stating that she would guide him through the sewers for this job and her name was Penny, the sewer cleaner. Upon seeing the guide, our protagonist is completely incredulous, noting that she looked like a child. Down in the sewers, lit by a torch, Dawn asks if the sewers are the foundations of the great city. Penny responds that they are, and that she takes care of everything. Our protagonist notes that she seemed very attached to her job, and proudly, Penny confirms it. Dawn tells her that she might encounter demons or criminals and asks if she doesn't find it dangerous. She responds that she does, but it's worth it. Impressed, Dawn notes that she is very positive and high-spirited. He also asks how long she has been working there, and Penny replies that it has been about 3 years. As they walk, Dawn is impressed, noting that most people don't last more than a year in that job, so she is a veteran. For a moment, the girl stops and says they are close to the spot marked on the map. Hearing this, Dawn looks to his side and asks if the young mage disappeared there. Penny confirms. It's a vast area in the sewers filled with sculptures and unknown corners. As our protagonist explores, he notes that the missing disciple is from the Magic Tower of Elgus, who are earth mages, so the sewers are advantageous for them. If he was a direct disciple of the ancient mage, he must be highly skilled. For someone of his caliber to be kidnapped, the person responsible must be that guy. As he looks idly in a direction, he imagines someone we don't know. This person was one of the biggest nuisances among the cultists, and, when he fully develops, will be called a one-man army. However, this person is still far from the completion of his powers, and for the sake of the future, Dawn should kill him now. As he walks, looking at the water, he sees a shining object. Picking it up, he realizes it's a necklace. Penny, seeing it, responds that it's a single-use defense spell necklace given to tower disciples. Dawn already knew that. Observing more closely, he notes that the crystal is no longer lit, meaning the spells stored inside are exhausted. This was the mage's final destination. As they observe the nearby structure, the boy becomes reflective, thinking about what to do next. He calls Penny and asks if she's good at fighting. He stares at a specific place, stands up, and draws his sword. Penny replies that she's good enough to defend herself, and Don responds that's sufficient. He prepares for a bloody battle, wielding his shield and sword in the same hand as his torch. He positions himself in front of Penny, asking her to stay behind him. Then, some beings begin to emerge from the entrance. Several monsters resembling humanoid frogs, walking on two legs, appear with their grotesque appearance, tongues out, drooling as if eyeing two prey. Seeing this, Don calls them frogmen, noting that even though they are lower-level monsters, they have high intelligence, making them difficult to combat. Looking back, Don sees Penny wielding a knife in a combat stance and nods, realizing he has nothing to worry about. Immediately, some frogs charge at our protagonist. In reaction, Don positions his sword. As soon as one of the monsters gets close, he swiftly cuts it in two before it can react. The other two creatures, which were behind, also move to attack. However, with extreme ease, he also cuts them in half, killing them instantly. Penny, however, is startled, making a face and asking Don to look. As he pays attention, he notices that an army of frogmen is coming from the entrance. Wiping his face from the blood, he starts to laugh, saying that maybe it's not an army but a company. Smiling wickedly, ready for battle, he adds that none of that matters. He charges at the monsters, saying that nothing will matter after he kills all of them. After a bloody battle, we see Penny holding her blood-stained knife, surprised. A pile of frogmen corpses is scattered throughout the sewer. Don, his body completely stained with blood, asks if Penny is okay, and she replies that she is, thanks to him. As she approaches, she says she has been part of the cleaning crew for 3 years, so she can handle a couple of frogmen. Suddenly, Don asks her not to come closer, leaving her confused as he positions himself in front of her. A sword comes toward him, and he barely manages to defend himself. He then throws his tool aside to draw his axe, intending to throw it into a dark passage where nothing can be seen. He throws his axe, which spins towards something. It seems to hit one of the frogmen, making a monstrous noise. Scared, Penny asks how he knew there was a beast there. He explains that monsters become more ferocious when hunting humans. Actually, he was using his night vision ability, allowing him to see in the dark. He notices that only 2 remain, with the last one fleeing. Penny asks what they should do, and Don explains that they will chase the monster since its lair is probably not far away. The woman, staring at our protagonist, feels somewhat embarrassed, saying he is extremely incredible. Don, noticing she had stopped, urges her to go immediately, and she agrees. After a long walk, they reach a hidden throne room. Penny, still a bit scared, nudges Don, pointing out that someone is sitting on the throne. On the throne sits a mage holding a staff imposingly. Don notes that it's the first time he's seen him in person. The pagan mage expelled from the magic tower, Derek. Sitting on his throne, Derek asks who our protagonist is and if he is the one who touched his experimental sample. Don thinks that the pagan mage was one of the bosses who gave him an unforgettable death. He confirms to Derek that he was the one who killed the Ratman because he was taking a stroll. The mage responds that he is lying because normal people don't take deep strolls in the sewers. He strikes his staff on the ground, making a loud noise, while saying that our protagonist should not have pursued the frogs that fled to his lair. Then, from the surrounding waters, several frogmen begin to emerge. Penny, seeing this, starts trembling, holding her knife and looking ahead with a terrified expression. Looking around, she sees an army of frogmen ready to attack. She steps back, saying that if this is released into the city, it will cause a catastrophe. However, Don touches her back, preventing her from moving further, which catches her attention and makes her blush. Looking at Don, she sees his firm and confident expression, as if wanting to reassure her. She understands that he can defeat as many frogmen as there are, so she doesn't need to despair. With a look of extreme psychopathy, Derek orders his frogmen to tear them both to pieces. Revealing their enormous teeth, the frogs charge ferociously. Don remains motionless before the army, ready to kill them. Holding his blood-stained sword, he asks Penny to stay behind him while he fights. He starts walking towards his opponents, reassuring her that he will finish this quickly. With a cold expression, Dawn states that if the conjurer dies, all the frogmen will die as well. Observing hundreds of these creatures coming at him with only a shield and a sword, he says, "There's only one answer." Swinging his sword with fluid and rapid movements, the only thing visible is the splatter of blood. One of the frogmen about to attack Dawn only sees its arm being cut off. Still, with a cold and frightening expression, our protagonist begins to shred several frogs, saying he would kill everyone in the way to get to the summoner. With just one step, he leaps forward, eliminating several frogs without giving them a chance to react. After dashing forward, one of the frogs comes at him, opening its mouth and revealing immense sharp teeth, ready to devour him. However, quickly, with a look of disgust, he splits the frog's jaw in two. As he lands, several frogs surround him, not allowing him to escape. With just one hand, he prepares himself, clenching his fist and quickly punching two of them, eliminating them. He notices one of the frogs trying to attack him from behind and swiftly reacts, cutting it in two. The battle continues, but with all of Dawn's swordsmanship skills, he can easily kill most of them. But his sword breaks in the process, and even his shield falls apart, leaving him with bare hands. All the frogmen seize this opportunity to attack. He uses his demon's armed combat ability to fight, furiously stating that he would finish off all those damn frogs. Several beasts continue trying to hit our protagonist, who with only his fists crushes their skulls and stomachs. Throughout the fight, he maintains a cold expression, clenching his fists and staining them with blood, showing no mercy. With a single blow to the stomach of one of the frogmen, he can throw it against the other creatures, sending them flying. Derek the wizard, upon seeing this, is terrified, seeing that the boy was very powerful and psychopathic. He wonders where such a monster had come from. Looking ahead, the pagan wizard does not notice Dawn advancing towards him with an axe in his hands, ready to finish him off. When he realizes it, it is too late. A purple trail of energy can be seen moving from top to bottom, following Dawn's motion with the axe. After the dust settles, we see that our protagonist has landed a full blow to the wizard's skull, who still utters his last words. Seeing that he had accomplished his goal, Dawn sighs in relief. A notification appears with the wizard's death, indicating that he had discovered the body of a mercenary who had become a pagan wizard. Our protagonist remembers the moment he fought and was absorbed by Derek, who had dragon blood in his body and was used for experiments. Dawn adds that thinking about it now, that scene was extremely horrific. Cursing the corpse lying before him, the system asks if he wanted to absorb the body. He then stretches out his hand and uses corpse gathering to increase his stats. Green energy flows through his body, and all his stats begin to increase, especially his energy and mana. He also gains an ability called Dragon Blood Regeneration, which he had obtained in his former body, and he is already at 6% proficiency. A bulge forms on our protagonist, and he starts to feel something flowing through him, causing extreme pain. A golden aura starts to spread across Dawn's body, making him appear covered in a gold-like energy. Everyone in the room, including Penny and the frogmen, are incredulous. For a moment, he remains still, feeling all this energy flowing through his body. With confidence, he turns, drawing the attention of the frogmen, and asks if they are ready for what is about to happen. After showing his new strength, all the frogs stare at our protagonist, trembling with fear. They immediately flee. Seeing this, Dawn sighs, closing his eyes. His thought is interrupted by Penny calling his name. He walks up to her, saying he told her to stay away, and she runs, asking if he is okay. A bit frightened, Penny asks if he is really human. Dawn asks what she means. Penny starts to say that even though he is human, not everyone is like him, as he killed dozens of frogs with just his hands. Dawn asks what she thinks about something, and she doesn't understand. Our protagonist responds that he only asked because he had nothing else to say. Embarrassed, touching the tips of her fingers, she says that even though it's the first time they've met, he is different. Extremely shy, she says that being near him makes her feel he could do anything. She doesn't care if he is human or not. What matters is that he is himself. But Dawn interrupts, asking her to wait. With a slightly embarrassed expression, he says he wasn't talking about her thoughts. He wanted to know what she thought about where the pagan mage hid the hostages, leaving the girl completely red like a tomato. The girl gets irritated, saying that if he doesn't explain what he's asking, she won't understand. Elsewhere, in a church with an upside-down cross sculpture, we see some people talking. 4 robed figures are conversing, and one of them says the reason for urgently calling this apostles' meeting is because Derek has died. All the others are shocked. One of them asks how a powerful pagan mage like him could have been killed. The mage conducting the meeting says that even though he was the last to be admitted, he wasn't the type of person who could be easily killed. One of the masked figures asks what happened to him and the army of 500 frogmen, leaving everyone incredulous. The man responds that half the army was killed and the rest fled in fear. One of them asks if it was the guards who did this. Another asks if it could have been someone linked to the Silent Company, but they also receive a no. The mage conducting the meeting says it was done by a single person, leaving one of the masked figures in shock. They continue talking, wondering why Derek kidnapped a direct apprentice of the elder mage. But an apostle enters the room. All the other masked figures bow, greeting the great apostle. The man wears a mask like all the others, but walks with an elegant and imposing posture. He walks to the center, sits on his throne, and says that the reason he called them there was to say not to fear just one mercenary. The masked woman who was previously worried asks if it was really a mercenary who single-handedly killed an army of monsters. However, the chief apostle tells her to shut up immediately, making her scared. The great apostle explains that he has moved up the date of the grand plan because Derek's death doesn't mean their plans will change. One of the apostles, hearing that the grand plan will be put into action, realizes that this means something significant. Then, the chief of all says to release the funds to buy ingredients for the secret drug and bring those who can wield weapons. Irritated, he adds that if things don't go well, they should pressure everyone with the power of the economy, since that is the reason they are increasing their power. The man says that nothing has changed and that the order of evil will begin with them. The day when the 7 walls collapse is not far off. He orders everyone to prepare. Elsewhere, after a long time, we see a magic tower in Elgaias. Looking at an extremely fancy clock, we see Don sitting in a comfortable armchair. He remembers Sienna saying that the person who had given the mission wanted to see him personally to give him extra compensation. Happy, Don continues looking around, saying there's nothing wrong with him receiving an additional reward. Bored, he opens his status window. He begins to read about the skill he had acquired. Dragon blood regeneration. It was applied to humans but consumes a lot of stamina. In the sewer, he slept for a day as soon as he returned. It seems he doesn't have full dragon blood, only partially. He calculates that it would be impossible to use that skill continuously in a fight. Suddenly, a man with red hair and a large beard enters the room, saying he had kept the guest waiting. This person was Felver Valentino, the ancient mage of the magic tower of Elgas. He apologizes, as it has been a while since he was last at the magic tower, so he had to catch up. Felver says he will ask for a cup of tea and asks if Don would like some, to which he replies, "Yes." The ancient mage says something, but Don immediately ignores it, starting to smell something he hadn't smelled in years. Coffee. Upon looking at the cup, he realizes it's really what he was hoping for. He starts drinking it immediately, loving it. The noble elder says that based on Don's appearance, he didn't expect him to like coffee. Felver comments that if it's okay, he will send a bag of beans to the raven's nest, and the boy agrees, thanking him. The man apologizes for the inconvenience and introduces himself as an elder mage of the magic tower of Elgas, as well as a grandmaster of the arts. He's also Tommy's teacher, the person Don saved. Felver thanks Don and mentions that Tommy is only well because of him. Our protagonist asks if he knew why the pagan mage went down there. The ancient mage explains that the villain coincidentally found his apprentice and followed his tracks. Looking at his reflection, Felver says that his apprentice didn't know that Derek's strategy was to reach him. The great elder thanks him for defeating the army of frogmen alone and says he couldn't believe Don was just a silver-rank mercenary. Don replies that he shouldn't judge people just by an identification plate, and the mage agrees. The man throws a bag full of coins on the table, saying that is the reward, 100 silver coins, equivalent to 1 gold coin. With a confident face, the mage adds that he will also reward him with something extra. Picking something up, he places a beautifully crafted bag on the table, saying that is the present. The mage explains that inside it is a regeneration potion, and he thought that since our protagonist is a sword-wielding warrior, it would be useful. But the mage adds that he thinks Don won't need it anymore since he has dragon blood inside him, making our protagonist startled. Seeing his reaction, the mage quickly asks him to calm down, as he's not there to threaten him but to make an offer. Irritated, Don tries to calm down, asking what the mage's offer is. Felver, with a completely different face and posture, offers our protagonist the chance to choose a different reward. At sunset, after a long conversation, we see Don leaving the place. He remembers Felver saying that he chose the right thing, so Don says that it's probably better than the potion. As he leaves, he remarks that he never imagined that the mage was so skilled that he could even recognize dragon blood in his body. He also recalls the moment he finished fighting the mage and saw his axe shattered. He feels sad as it was his last tool since his sword and shield were also destroyed. Penny notes that he can't do anything more with those and says he needs to buy new ones. A bit embarrassed, she says her uncle is a blacksmith and asks if Don wants to visit him because, since he is special, she will ask her uncle to give him a good discount. In the present moment, Don sighs, saying that if he's going to get a good discount, he should go there. Far away, we see the Forge Street in the Bronze territory. As he walks, Alan says he thinks the girl gave him that location but isn't sure. However, he hears someone shouting for help and is confronted with an unbelievable sight. Someone being thrown out of the forge Penny had told him about, hands tied. Inside the forge, a blond man had thrown the person out after kicking him, saying the old man was screwing everything up. The blacksmith begs them to leave his niece Penny alone and curses the bastards. Don realizes what's happening and notices that the man is the girl's uncle. The man who was assaulting the blacksmith leaves the forge, saying that he should have repaid the interest on time. The blonde thug says that if the blacksmith doesn't have money, he could use his niece to pay the debt, causing Penny to despair. The blacksmith tells the thug that if he continues saying those things, he will make him pay. Our protagonist watches the fight from afar, observing the entire situation. The blacksmith Penny mentioned is named Lean Erican, a well-known myethil refiner. By the second half of the game, this blacksmith develops exponentially and creates the greatest weapons for humanity. He is a very important NPC. Returning to the present moment, the blond man draws a sharp knife and says the man could pay with one of his hands. However, someone firmly grasps his wrist. The man gets irritated, asking who is doing that. Our protagonist snatches the sword from the thug's hand, saying, "If an old man's hand costs a gold coin, how much would a young man's hand cost?" The last thing we hear is the thug's scream echoing through the city. Some time passes. We see a mug of beer on a table, and the blacksmith thanks our protagonist for saving him and his niece. The man says he had heard about Don because his niece had mentioned him. He asks Don, who is drinking, if he needs a new weapon. Unfortunately, the blacksmith explains that he cannot make a suitable weapon for him now because he has a debt with the shop. Wiping the drink from the corner of his mouth, Don asks what the man's debt has to do with making weapons. The blacksmith gets irritated, slamming his hands on the table, saying that people confiscated all his tools as interest. With this debt, a shop told him that if he worked for them for 5 years, the debt would be paid off. However, for a neighborhood blacksmith like him, the moment he closed the shop, it would end. Our protagonist assumes the man tried to maintain his position, and in the end, the thugs came to threaten him. The blacksmith ignores this, only mentioning that he hates those bastards from Tilia, which catches Don's attention. He says that if Don came with that purpose, he could forget it. But unexpectedly, he is interrupted. Our protagonist asks how much the man owes, making him incredulous. Confident, Don says he will pay the debt for him, smiling happily. He begins to leave, but the blacksmith tries to stop him, saying the amount is too high for one person to pay alone. As he leaves, Don just waves goodbye, saying there is a way for everything in this world, and he doesn't need to worry. But in return, he wants the blacksmith to make some weapons. As he leaves, Don picks up an axe from the forge to complete his mission. Looking back, he tells the blacksmith to consider it a deposit. Finally, before leaving, he thanks him for the beer. The only thing the dwarf does is watch him leave. The blacksmith turns to his niece, asking who that man was. Embarrassed, she says they first need to consider whether he was human or not, but in short, he was an incredible person. At night, elsewhere, we see several carriages with various supplies arriving. Someone speaks to Bulkma, who is carrying a log. Our protagonist asks Bulkma if he could lend him some money, around a handful of gold coins. The man doesn't even know what to say, only observing the boy in front of him. After a while, in a house, we see someone with a bag of coins in their hand. Dawn says it was a commission. We recall the moment when Dawn was negotiating with Bulkma, explaining that a family member has a debt. The noble asks what it's about while eating some grapes. Our protagonist explains that it's a business fund debt that kept accumulating. Again, Dawn asks if the man could lend him the gold or not. Bulkma is a bit hesitant. While smoking, he asks with whom this person created the debt. Dawn responds that it was with the Tilia shop. Upon hearing this, the dwarf makes an irritated face. The noble then says he will lend the money. Dawn, eating an apple, says it seems the man also has connections with Tilia. He asks what he should do in return, and the noble says he thinks quickly while extinguishing his cigar. He says that the Tilia shop is an organization with dirty funds, so he arranges to meet Dawn tomorrow at the same time. Dawn starts to explain about the Tilia shop, an organization illegally created by the Apostles of Retrograde, a group of cultists. They control most of the commercial power in the Bronze territory. Dawn didn't plan to meet them so soon, but since they got involved, he will have to crush them. He would confront them now, but they are still a legal merchant association, meaning fighting them openly is very risky. First, he needed to get Lean out of their clutches. Something comes to mind, making the boy a bit shocked. Looking ahead, he notices something he doesn't want to see. He realizes the Tilia shop is in front of the blacksmith shop, meaning they have started moving quickly. To protect his allies, he begins to run towards the forge. He sees a group of people armed with knives and clubs in front of the forge, ready to kill Penny and her uncle. One of the men tells the old man to follow them obediently. With a hammer in his hand, the blacksmith says he won't go, cursing all the henchmen. The man starts mocking the blacksmith, but the truth is he's just taunting him with an army behind him. The leader of the thugs says that even if the old man can defend himself for a moment, he wouldn't be able to fight them all. The old man, no longer in his prime, starts trembling in fear. The thug leader then finally gives the order to attack the old man and Penny. However, before he can react, an axe comes flying towards him, cutting off his hand. He lifts his bleeding fist and screams in pain. Another thug was about to warn that they were under attack, but immediately, Dawn appears behind him, grabbing him by the neck and breaking it. The thugs look at the boy attacking, and Dawn says he has finally made up his mind. With one foot on the lifeless body, he says he will consider each hand of everyone there as a silver coin. Since the price for the hands had been set, he proceeded to get a few more. His armed combat skill had been activated. The first face struck by his fist was crushed like a stoned soda can. The next in line received a punch to the stomach to reflect on his conduct. The third one, even armed with a sword, couldn't defend himself. There was nothing those fools could do. Even so, those who hadn't been beaten yet tried to react, but they had no success. One of them said not to be afraid because their attacker was unarmed. Dawn heard this with a smile on his face because he didn't need to be armed to handle them. As soon as they arrived, they were shocked by the scene. The street now had a grim decoration with unconscious bodies. A bystander crawled away in fear, saying they had been attacked by a monster. His neck was stepped on, preventing him from crawling further. The two who had arrived wanted to know who had taken down the fools. Without answering, he tossed them a sack containing 26 coins. The man couldn't believe this young man had done all this for him. In response, Dawn said there was nothing to lose by being friends with a blacksmith, as long as he made him some weapons. Looking at the ground, he noticed something different about one of the bodies. He took it in his hands because he knew the young man was pretending to be dead. He knew they hadn't done this just for a few coins and wanted to know what his superiors intended. Even at a disadvantage, the young man said he wouldn't say anything. Since he gave the wrong answer, he got slapped back to reality. Without much patience, Dawn told him this was his last chance. The young man said to take all of them, artisans, merchants, anyone related to the business. Take them or kill them. Before he could answer, the boy's hand twisted in a bizarre way. He was transforming. But he said the order came from the owner of Tilia's shop. His face gave way to a lycanthropic smile. Before the transformation was complete, Dawn threw him to the ground. Seeing an axe nearby, he grabbed it. Now that creature was just a body without a head. The blacksmith didn't know what it was, but he heard from the man that it was a half-monster. Apparently, they could now use semi-monster transformations in real life, a faster development than he had expected. As he was leaving, he told them to go inside, lock the doors, and stay there for a few days. The blacksmith wanted to know where he was going. In his memories, he knew Tilia's shop had repugnant things. He was headed to Gallus's Emporium because he thought they were targeting one of his wealthy clients. Once he was done there, he would return to get his armor and weapons. In a room, a large chandelier lit the space. The man thought it must be a coincidence that even Dawn had gone to speak at Tilia's shop. They had always been suspicious, but he had learned that lately they were buying a lot of goods. It seemed they were preparing for something big. That's when he remembered the man asking what he'd like him to do. Having coffee as the first activity of the morning was certainly wonderful. It didn't take long for him to be startled by someone suddenly entering through the window. It was Dawn, who had arrived in an extravagant manner. He didn't know why Dawn had arrived so suddenly, but he had already ordered the man to duck. Through the window, arrows began flying in. Startled, he wanted to know what this meant. Dawn sighed in relief, saying that if he had been a little later, it would have been much worse. He would explain soon, but for now, the man had to hide under his bed. Reacting quickly, he threw the axe he was holding out the window. There was an archer hidden on one of the nearby rooftops. His face now became a place to hold an axe. As he left the room, he ordered the man not to leave until he returned. Dawn was quite happy because he would gain some experience now. The man heard what he said but understood nothing. He jumped out the window toward the nearest roof. Beside him was the small body of the archer. The axe holder wore a white mask. He looked around. There were several of these men with masks. This was their main military force, white and gold masks. This indicated they wouldn't just stand by. Preparing for what was to come, he gripped the axe. A projectile flew in his direction. With skill, he used the axe to defend himself. Standing still wouldn't help, so he started to move. Before him were already a few of the fools who looked surprised. They tried to attack him in vain. The first axe strike landed perfectly. It didn't take long for him to be close to the next one. This time, the axe brought about a separation of head and body. Now only 3 were left, and another projectile came his way. Once again, the axe was useful. Someone said he must be the soldier who killed Derek. This man calmly approached him. They stood face to face, but on different rooftops. As soon as the masked man realized it was him, he expressed his desire to taste some of his blood. This was a silver mask. He hadn't expected an executive member to be there. This was Stray Litter Hen, a low-class assassin vampire who used poison. In the game, it was difficult even to react to his attacks. Still, he was excited to see how things would go. He hoped to resolve everything in a single strike. The vampire waited, smiling. Dawn noticed something was wrong. He was now in the middle of a trap. He did his best to defend against the stakes. Now he felt he had been too reckless. Because of his character's body that this guy had consumed, a notification appeared. He had discovered the killer who dismembered bodies under the night sky. The recent attack wasn't made by him alone. If that was the case, he needed to take care of those guys first. The henchmen attacked in unison. Dawn found himself surrounded. With exceptional mastery, he disappeared and was already upon some of them. His axe found the first of many targets. His strikes were precise and lethal. The long-range shooters were no longer breathing. He then prepared to throw his axe toward them. Without time to react, one had already been hit. Preparing to finish them off, he used his combat ability. The survivor of this strike called him a monster. Dawn was relieved that only one of them remained. However, he noticed an attack coming from behind. He had to defend immediately, using the axe to stop the projectiles. But what he didn't expect was for poison to come out of them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he tried to move away from the smoke, but he was already poisoned. The vampire said that a simple human couldn't resist a deadly poison. The vampire was relieved not to have faced him head-on. Being a vampire, the poison didn't affect him, but he hoped the human wouldn't be able to resist. Amidst the smoke, he approached what he thought was the body of his victim. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't him. That body wore a golden mask. Dawn is already behind him, ready to let the blade of the axe sing. The vampire didn't expect this attack, much less that the human was still alive. Though caught by surprise, the first attack didn't hit him. What occupies his thoughts now is how the human resisted the poison. The only possible explanation is that he must not be human. The man says his eyes are burning. It reminded him of tear gas when he was a soldier, but the vampire has no idea what that is. He began to attack frantically. Dawn sighed, unconcerned. Their attack patterns were always the same. While the dragon's blood regenerated him, Dawn's foot sank into the roof. The vampire couldn't believe that the man was already before him. Worse than that, his throat was now in the palm of that monster's hand. With him immobilized, Dawn asked if the vampire would like to say his last words. He finally asked him how he survived the poison. The vampire shouted that it was impossible. Dawn told him he was talking too loud and crushed his throat. Luckily, it was a low-class vampire. If it had been higher, he would have turned into a bat and escaped. With that, he found a body that had perished trying to take down the vampire. The system wanted to know if he wanted to collect the body. The body was collected by him. With that, he inherited the vampire's abilities, plus 3 points in strength and jumping skill. Still in the house, the man was terrified. He never imagined he would be the target of an assassination. He remained in the room, holding a sword, looking out the window. He tried to calm down. He wondered if it was all just a dream. Preparing to open the door, he hoped Dawn was still alive. A loud noise erupted behind him. He turned, ready to defend himself. However, he felt ill and collapsed. Downstairs, Dawn said he needed to better control his strength. Returning, he told the owner of the emporium that he had completed his task but found him unconscious. He thought he might have been poisoned. But again, the man didn't know why his mouth was foaming. In the room, someone entered, wondering what all the noise was about. The person who entered was Sienna. To her, it made sense that the noise was caused by Dawn. She brought the information he had asked for. The three of them sat in the room, drinking tea while they talked. The man wanted to know if she was the informant from the Raven's Nest. She confirmed. He couldn't believe she had an infiltrator in the emporium. Looking at him, she spoke again, saying she had the information he requested. She discovered which organization those silver masks belonged to. He hadn't thought she'd have enough time, but the girl had proven more capable than he expected. He asked who they were. They were heretics serving an evil god and called themselves Apostles of Regression. Additionally, there was one more thing. That book was the ledger from Tilia's shop. Upon inspecting the book, he discovered a few more things. The owner of Tilia's shop was one of the executives of the Apostles of Regression. In recent days, they had been buying large quantities of medicines, metals, and weapons. All these goods were stored in a warehouse they had purchased a long time ago. Dawn knew the place. There were signs of the masked men there, as well as the people they had kidnapped. It seemed they intended to turn the hired thugs into semi-monsters and use the artisans to make weapons. This was the prelude to a war that would soon take place. He wanted to know if there were any updates on the Bronze Guards. Since she was close to the commander of the Silent Company, she had spoken with him and it seemed he would cooperate, but it would be difficult to attack the place without concrete evidence. However, for Dawn, that wasn't a problem. They just needed to create a justification for the guards to intervene. After the conversation ended, night fell over the city. A man complained about the cold. They were standing guard at that building. His companion told him to stay quiet because if a golden mask heard that, he would be killed. The apostles had been working hard, and the grand plan will soon be put into action. Without warning, his companion fell to the ground. Dawn was already behind him. Standing before the young man, Dawn wanted to know more about those white and gold masks. After all, he had killed them all. Hearing this, the young man was incredulous. Without waiting for his reaction, Dawn struck him. There were a total of 30 people there. Many were on the rooftops and in the alleys, but most of them were already unconscious. Now he jumped from the roof and headed for the ground. It's possible the beggars and addicts had been captured and monstrified. In the morning, he received confirmation that the bronze guards would assist them. The plan was simple: invade the building, deal with the enemies, and start a fire. Once the fire began, the guards who would coincidentally be nearby would help extinguish it. With that, they would gain access to heretical evidence. In theory, it was a perfect plan. Only one thing bothered him. The building had 5 floors, and the owner of the shop must be inside. If an invasion occurred, he didn't know if that person would flee. Regardless, Don was prepared. He had to step on them. The worst outcome would be losing the shop's intel. To avoid that, he would choose another method. With that, he began to move. Don ran at the speed of an Olympic sprinter. His steps were powerful. He prepared to jump, using his newly acquired ability. He was almost at the top floor. In midair, he chose a spot to gain access. His hand prepared a punch to make an entrance. The window shattered, and he was inside. It had been some time. There were cells in the place, but no one was guarding them. This prison held captive the half-monsters. Seeing all of this brought back unpleasant memories. A man said Don was making too much noise and that he and his apostles had witnessed the presence of God. However, it was the first time he doubted what his eyes were seeing. He wanted to know if Don had cast a spell. This was Achilles, the owner of the shop. Don said he didn't know much about spells, but as a rich man, Achilles could go to the doctor to get his eyes checked. The battle between the two began. At first, they both seemed evenly matched. Their blades clashed and sparks flew. Don was stronger than an ordinary man. If someone told him Don was a giant, he would believe it. Don pushed him back with a single blow. Achilles caught his breath and remembered that the Grand Apostle had a reason to hasten his plan. He began to chant a dark incantation. Don seemed to recognize the spell. A red aura formed, and it looked like he was awakening the half-monsters. In the cells, the monsters were growing stronger. It would take some time for the spell to take full effect. It was time for Don to act. He threw his axe toward the masked man to distract him, but Achilles positioned his sword, ready to defend. With one strike, he deflected the axe, sending it back into Don's hands. Without wasting time, Don leaped to attack him. Despite the strength of the blow, he was once again stopped by the sword. However, Achilles once again felt the disproportionate strength of this man. From below, a knee was on a collision course with his face. Achilles takes the first blow. He couldn't block it. Despite that, he wasn't disoriented and managed to use his sword to strike back. Don wielded his axe with mastery. Achilles, anxious, prepared to do whatever he could. The two charged at each other once again. Don, using his axe, managed to pressure him. Since he only used one hand, he was able to prepare the other for a punch. Achilles was struck squarely again. He writhed in agony. Don simply watched the trajectory of his opponent's body. Fallen, Achilles coughed. Then he said, "Anxitarian," and bluish flames appeared behind him. The half-monsters in the area seemed more and more out of control. As the flames rose, they appeared to fall under control for a brief moment, until the monsters began to go berserk again. They broke out of their cells. Don waited for them to get a little closer. The system notified him that he had discovered a mage who used a body's sword. The monsters swarmed him. They did everything they could to keep him in the middle of them, but what emerged from the swarm were countless cuts. Achilles watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend that Don wasn't even tired. His armor, hidden beneath the tunic, had been destroyed by that man's fists. Looking at him, Achilles thought about what else could be done. He needed to set an ambush. While Don was distracted, he used a skill he learned in the Order of Knights. In his current state, there would only be one opportunity. He waited for the right moment, finding an opening. He advanced through the monsters to strike Don. In a few moments, he would pierce that bastard. Don had his back turned, apparently unaware. The blade drew nearer. Achilles believed he had succeeded, but just as he got close enough, the tip of his sword was sliced by the axe. That outcome wasn't something within the realm of possibility. The force of the blow also destroyed the handle of the axe. Don didn't know why the instant death strike had happened so suddenly. With that, Achilles began to fall to the ground, wounded. Don is frustrated because he could no longer use that axe. However, he began to cough as he had injured himself. Blood poured from his mouth. The dragon's regeneration kicked in. Don wanted to see his status window. He was still at level 6. His body was suffering from side effects. Perhaps because he had increased his strength just enough to stay balanced, he needed to be cautious. There was still one more thing. The system said he had defeated the target. He had discovered a mage who used a body's sword. The system wanted to know if he would collect the body. While collecting the body, he imagined that he could have seen the end if he used both magic and swords, but the result had failed. Finally, the body collection was complete. He inherited the body's abilities, gaining 2 points of mana and 1 point of stamina. As a skill, he could now use the fire arrow. A notification appeared saying that the knowledge of the spell had now transferred to his mind. The sensation was different. A small fire appeared in the palm of his hand. It was certainly an interesting skill. With that ability, it was time to play with fire. The building was already engulfed in flames. Outside, the guards ensured no one inside escaped. The half-monsters were being taken down mercilessly. Likewise, the masked ones had their escape routes blocked. In the midst of the fierce battle, the guards continued to press forward. One of them, enraged, threatened his enemies, but he was caught off guard by a golden mask. His lowered guard allowed the enemy to knock him to the ground. Discreetly, he tried to reach for a weapon, but the masked man saw this and stomped on it. He imagined this was the end for him. At the last instant, something unexpected saved him. He still didn't know what had happened. From the top of the building stood the person who had saved him. It was Don. He still had many arrows left. Holding them as if they were spears, he prepared to throw them. His feet braced themselves. He threw the 3 arrows at the same time. They soared through the sky. Upon hitting their targets, they produced a large impact zone. The guards who witnessed this were frozen in place. However, it wasn't over yet, and another order was given to finish off their enemies. From above, Don saw that the situation was now favorable. Holding his axe, he was prepared to join the battle. Focusing, he would use his jumping ability to descend. With great agility, he headed toward the ground, aiming for an enemy. When the battle ended, bodies decorated the street. The current effort was to rescue those who still had a chance. Seeing how necessary potions were, he thought he should have taken some from the old mage. If he had them, he could save a few more people. But the offer he accepted instead would allow him to save even more people in the future. Nearby, someone called his name. He was finally meeting the famous mercenary Don. It was Gain, the leader of the Silent Guard squad. Thanks to Don's information, they had been able to pull this off. This leader was more talented than Don had expected. Greeting him, Don mentioned that he had heard Gowani was the one who spoke to Elgaya about him. He had a good impression of him. Once again, he wished him luck in future endeavors. As soon as they finished speaking, Don felt a bit unwell. It was possible he had pushed himself too hard. He said he would take his leave. Gowani mentioned that even though Don was strong, he should wear armor. In response, Don said he would get some very soon. By the dawn of the next day, he was walking through the city streets. He had spoken with the owner of the Emporium, but was supposed to be around here. Looking up, it seemed he had found it. The forge that had been prepared for the blacksmith's new beginning. Entering, he asked how the work was going. The woman greeted him happily. She then called for her uncle, informing him that Don had finally arrived. The timing was perfect. The blacksmith had just finished what Don had requested. Looking at the chest, Don thanked him. Don prepared to open the chest. His eyes finally met the armor. Once dressed in it, he expressed how much he liked it. This made the blacksmith happy, and he said Don could also choose some weapons. Don was grateful. While he was there, someone entered the forge. Don bid farewell, apologizing for not being able to pay the full amount, but the blacksmith said he was only in this new forge because of him. Outside, someone said Don had come faster than expected and that the situation must be serious. He apologized for interrupting but said the situation was dire. He truly needed Don's help. The remaining forces of the heretics had gathered. The ETH territory was entirely under their control. Mounted on their horses, they left the city. Don wanted to know how the ETH territory had fallen. They had discovered where their fortress was located. When they joined forces to enter, the heretics had already flooded the region. They had a hidden refuge. No one had expected the attack. They almost managed to establish a defense perimeter. Events different from those in the game were unfolding constantly. Something like this happening just 2 days after the attack on the shop, but this wasn't entirely bad. If things were changing, it meant they were moving further away from ruin. He couldn't miss this opportunity. At the Bronze Guard's fortress, a hand slammed on the table. The chief guard of the 7th Territory said that if they entered there, they would be annihilated. But they couldn't just abandon those people. What they had to do was establish a defense until reinforcements arrived. But if that was the plan, the chief of the ETH region said the people there would remain in constant danger. One of the guards said it was his mission to prevent something like this. However, the chief smiled, appearing corrupt. His suggestion was to block trade routes. Don said, "That's not what would happen." The chief turned his attention to the stranger. If they did nothing, the heretics would grow in numbers and attack. Hearing this, the chief of the 7th region became furious. He didn't want to listen to a mere mercenary. But the one accompanying him told the man to watch his words, because that mercenary had been instrumental in the capture of Tilia's shop. Knowing this, the old man was surprised. Realizing that rumors spread quickly, the situation now favored him. Don said there was only one thing to do now: a surprise and preemptive attack. Gowan said that what the mercenary said was correct. Anyone who had participated in the attack knew they had half-monsters who were beggars and addicts. It was only a matter of time before all the inhabitants of the 8th district met the same fate. With this information, they became pensive. There was nothing the corrupt old man could do. They said they were there to help, but because the initial blow was so hard, they almost didn't manage to establish a defense perimeter. It would be good to have reinforcements, but nothing had arrived yet. If they were waiting for reinforcements from the Silver Territory, they would arrive soon. The man wanted to know how Don knew that. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. They didn't know if it was an earthquake or an attack. Outside, several people gathered. One of the guards wanted to know who they were. The man at the front said it seemed there had been a misunderstanding and that they were from the Silver Territory. They were from the magical tower of the Silver Territory. The timing was perfect. It had been a long time since they had seen each other. Calling Don an old man, smiling, the mage said it was good to have lived so long. He was Felver Valentino. In conversation, Felver said he wanted to offer Don another reward. If the city was ever in danger and Don called for help, he would do his best to assist. Now was time to fulfill that promise. The help of mages was always welcome, and Don thanked him for keeping his promise. In the dead of night, horses galloped swiftly. Their rider was in a hurry. He needed to ensure that everyone knew the message. Looking at his companions, Don remembered what they had discussed. After sharing the plan, he asked them to raise their hands. Not all of them agreed. Attacking first was risky, and he hoped to do it alongside people he could trust. The chief of the 8th Territory was to oversee the area. Only the elite would enter the mines. The Bronze Guards were being led by the leader of the Silent Division. The mages were also with them. It would be just them attacking the cult. Not far from them was the entrance to the mine. At the entrance, the mage said he could feel sinister magic coming from within. Inside, a dreadful scream echoed. It might be a half-monster. As they waited, a human figure came running towards them. His face was disfigured and terrified. He begged them to save him. To their surprise, it was the chief of the 7th Territory. The disfigured man recognized the voice and knew it was the leader of the Silent Squad. He pleaded for help, claiming he had been betrayed. This revealed why he hadn't provided support. He had been in collusion with the cultists. Before they could converse further, something caught Don's attention. A man had killed him, saying it was disgusting for a traitor to speak of betrayal. Looking at those who had just arrived, the man was pleased. They needed more sacrifices. This was going to be complicated. They had to put an end to it. Gowan asked Don to leave it to him. He wanted to take care of this guy. The masked man wanted to know who Gowan was. He remembered Gowan as the son of that beggar. The taste of his blood had been so potent that he still remembered it. Hearing these words, Gowan was consumed with rage. However, the mage urged him to calm down, because that wasn't the only enemy. Gowan didn't understand. The mage continued walking, chanting an incantation. A small flame appeared in his hand. The ground beneath them gave way. He made another gesture, and the stones gathered to bury the masked man. One of the soldiers watched, impressed. There were many more cultists in that place. Don realized they had been hiding in the mist. It was possible a mage had created it. One of the legs of the platform they were on broke. To avoid falling, some began jumping. One of them recognized the mage and wasn't pleased. The lizard man's foot hit the ground. They had all been spotted. They would respond accordingly. Some of the bronze guards were anxious. Go-On prepared himself. Don observed the cultists' next movements. Someone behind them placed their hand on the ground. The half-monsters were approaching. Their misshapen bodies reflected suffering. One of the soldiers thought these were creatures from hell. Even the mages struggled to maintain their composure. On the other hand, Don was quite pleased. The cultists must have been having a great time. They would do anything for the grand plan, and he couldn't wait to turn them into sacrifices. The mage would handle the enemy mages. Go-On would take care of the lizard man and the monsters, and Don would deal with them. The battle had finally begun, each engaged with their respective enemies. Don moved across the field, approaching a monster. The monstrous creature tried to strike him. The powerful blow hit the ground, but Don had already moved away. Leaping from above, he decided to attack. His axe descended toward the creature. A precise strike hit the disfigured body. Seeing the creature in pain brought him great joy. It was time to find out how much experience this creature would give him. The axe struck the monster's head, but nothing happened. Even though it had sunk halfway into its face, the creature remained alive. Don tried to pull his weapon out while the creature raged in agony. This was a monster created with mana from hell. If that was the case, it must have a mana core. The axe finally dislodged from the creature's skull. With the axe free, the wound began to bleed profusely. This was an incredibly resilient creature. Don knew he had to approach it cautiously. He attacked the monster again with care to avoid his weapon getting stuck. This time, the creature reacted in time to block the attack, but its effort was futile. Don found leverage on one of its arms. His position now gave him the advantage. Due to its misshapen body, the creature couldn't look up. Don's strike was devastating. There was no longer a head on that body. Its excessive size made it lack agility. He had to take advantage of this. However, something made him stay alert. A mass of arms and hands advanced toward him. He did his best to defend against the attacks. The hands were too many. The attack pattern was as ugly as the creature's face. Using the strength of one of his arms, he managed to attack the monster at close range. Now he was using his combat ability. It was time to strike that hideous face once again with an elbow. His forearm connected with all the force he could muster. The monster's face sank further into its body. Don was now back on the ground. The creature's body had sustained a lot of damage, but it wasn't time to stop. Once again, he charged. What followed was a barrage of blows to the monster's flabby belly. After all those impacts, its mana core was exposed. Don had found what he was looking for. Using his fire-producing ability, he prepared to incinerate everything. A fire arrow formed in his hands. He prepared to launch it toward the mana core. The arrow flew, leaving a circular trail as it passed and shattered the core. With that strike, the remaining heads of the monster began to scream even louder. The noise was deafening. Inside the mine, numerous half-monsters began to emerge. The situation was growing more frustrating. In the face of all this, they needed to find the Grand Apostle as soon as possible. A soldier called out for support for the mercenary. The knights knew they had to eliminate all the monsters. A mage prepared his incandescent bow. A barrage of magical arrows was fired. The monsters were pierced as if they were made of paper. With cover, the soldiers advanced. Don hadn't expected any less from the squad leader and the old mage's men. Leaping over the head of a monster, it was time to leave that area. But he needed that shield for a moment. He left the place, leaving the soldier without his shield and confused. With the shield in hand, Don leaped along the walls of the mine's corridor. The lizard-like man didn't want the mercenary to get ahead of him. Seeing him distracted, Go-On seized the opportunity to strike. The lizard man's head was nearly severed. The masked man taunted him. saying that no one would have imagined the son of a beggar would become someone like Gowan. To provoke him further, he said he would show Gowan how much he enjoyed the day he devoured his mother. He pulled out 2 large axes. His mask had fallen. The crocodile man wanted to discover the taste of the beggar's son. Gowan didn't respond and declared that before that happened, he would cut out the lizard man's mouth. Without hesitation, he leaped toward the crocodile man. Their battle was becoming increasingly fierce. The mage commented that he wouldn't assist the squad leader because Gowan wanted to handle it on his own. He would merely observe. Besides, it seemed they were winning. He then asked if the masked enemy before him didn't agree. The masked man replied that even if they lost, it would be impossible to stop the Grand Apostle. The grand plan would inevitably be fulfilled in a way no one expected. This left the mage intrigued, but the masked man said nothing more, only smiling cynically. Don told the Grand Apostle to lift the state he was in because he had surrendered his body to demons. But thanks to Don, they didn't have enough sacrifices. Even so, the Apostle didn't regret his pact. He began to thank the mercenary, the warrior observed by the gods, the hero who wanted to prevent the end. Before the Apostle could finish his monologue, an axe was already buried in his face. The Apostle briefly smiled. He knew he could no longer be killed by an attack like that. Don stopped speaking because he had noticed something. On the ground were several marks. He had just found the body of the 6th Apostle and that of the great warrior. After playing this game many times, Don had committed himself to completing it. At times, he even led the downfall. Once, he had been an apostle. His first deviation. The end of that story had been a long succession of deaths. He had shown no mercy. At a single opportunity, Don had found 2 bodies. The apostle remained focused, intent on attacking him. His goal was to make Don another sacrifice. The tentacles made it difficult for Don to find an opening. The apostle had formed a contract with a low-class demon, Araction. It had incredible regenerative abilities. The apostle commented on how skilled Don was at dodging. The apostle's image began to blur. Don realized he was disappearing. A small cut appeared on his cheek. Now the apostle was moving incredibly fast. Don tried to defend himself, but his enemy was already at his side. He did his best to react in time, but unfortunately, he was already trapped by one of the tentacles. This situation was not looking good. Struggling to free himself, Don attempted an attack, but the apostle had disappeared once more. Feeling more exhausted than usual, Don suspected he might have been poisoned. The dragon's blood within him began to regenerate his body, but it was taking longer than usual. Keeping up with the apostle's speed in this state would be no easy task. The apostle leaped along the walls with immense speed. He positioned himself behind the mercenary, but this time, Don had anticipated it. The apostle's tentacles reacted just as quickly. Face to face with the apostle once more, Don was about to land another powerful blow. With his shield, he struck the ground. Though the apostle had managed to dodge, some of his tentacles were now trapped. The apostle was surprised. The mercenary attacked again. This time, the top of the apostle's head was sliced off. The body collapsed. Don planned to keep attacking, but he was surprised again. More tentacles emerged from the apostle's head. The apostle remarked that the warrior had many tricks. Muttering an incantation, the apostle's face transformed, revealing large fangs. His appearance had completely changed. With the transformation, a spell was cast, and Don was engulfed in its power. The force hurled him through the air. The attack was strong enough for Don's dragon blood ability to kick in once again. It was much like the last time. The second body to fall to the Grand Apostle, the great warrior who had been captured. It wasn't that Don lacked strength. What he lacked was the endurance to keep up with the apostle's regenerative abilities. The power of a demon was truly incredible. The apostle's tentacles now took the form of spider legs. No matter how many tricks the mercenary had, they were all useless now. The apostle awaited Don's next move. The answer was clear. A single decisive blow was needed to end it all. One attack, nothing more. With heightened senses, the apostle could hear the beating of a heart. The mercenary's presence in the room had changed dramatically, as if he had become a boulder. The apostle knew he had to eliminate this growing threat. His tentacles rushed toward Don with the intent to kill. They were just inches away from striking his face fatally. But with a single punch, Don stopped them and called out to the Apostle, telling him to listen. With his combat ability activated, Don wanted to know if the Apostle had ever been punched before. Planting his feet firmly, he used his jumping ability. With incredible speed and force, he closed in. The Apostle covered himself with his tentacles, hoping to protect himself, but the mercenary smiled. His punch was powerful enough to pierce through the Apostle's body. The Apostle recognized Don's skill, acknowledging that it had forced him to retreat. But this, according to the Apostle, was the end of Don's journey. Don responded with a laugh, saying it wasn't his time yet. The mercenary had begun to invoke a spell while still gripping the creature's body. A great incandescent light filled the room. The Apostle never had a name before. The best way to describe it was that his name had vanished until the day he offered himself to the Dark God in exchange for revenge. On that day, his existence was completely forgotten. Now he was nothing more than a servant of the eel deity. He had become the grand apostle of the dwarf who manipulated fate. He sought to destroy the last bastion of humanity, but none of that mattered anymore as he burned endlessly. Even in his deplorable state, he managed to impale the mercenary with one of his tentacles. But that wasn't enough to stop Don, as he too had the ability to regenerate. If the Apostle couldn't gain distance, he wouldn't be able to heal from the flames. What he hadn't expected was being unable to retract his tentacles from the mercenary's body. Don wasn't about to stand idle. He was already preparing to punch the Apostle once more. Even with his body pierced, he wasn't going to let him escape. Now the Apostle's monstrous face was crushed. The Apostle hadn't expected to die in this place. The Apostle's tentacles lay severed on the ground. The Apostle asked the mercenary if he knew that graphite and diamonds were made from the same material. The highest point can one day become the lowest, and vice versa. The Apostle had wanted to create a new order under divine will, but it seemed he couldn't defy reason. Perhaps this victory was nothing more than destiny. Listening to all of this, Don simply responded that the Apostle was spouting nonsense. People had free will and decided their own lives, even Don, who had been pursued from the Diamond Palace. Hearing this, the Apostle acknowledged it as a possibility. He tried to say more, but his life slipped away. It was the first time Don had heard the dying words of a boss monster. There were two bodies now, the Great Warrior and the Apostle. He needed both. His proficiency increased by 1 point, as did his mana. As a new skill, he gained the ability to manipulate ice. Upon collecting the other body, he gained 4 additional strength points. That was a lot to absorb at once. His body wasn't adapting well. He began to writhe in pain. If anything unexpected happened, he might not survive. He needed to endure it. Suddenly, Don found himself in another place. This was the starting point of the story. He wasn't sure if it was a dream or if he had returned after dying. His physical body was far from this place. He was resisting the absorption of the strength points. It seemed like there was something he needed to do. He opened the door of the cabin. Inside, he encountered an unusual scene. It was his own room, and someone sat in front of a computer playing a game. It was the game he used to play endlessly. The character on the screen was the one he used to create. As the person moved the mouse, they were deciding the next mission. Don stared, stunned. It couldn't just be a game. The times he played without the will to win, the NPCs he had killed, the times he gave up on saving people. He had no idea how many worlds he might have destroyed. A hand gripped his ankle, pleading to be saved. Shadows emerged from the ground, all begging for the same thing. Indeed, the person in front of him was himself, but it represented his past, not who he was now. Realizing the magnitude of the situation, Don became furious. Though he had stopped the destruction, it didn't mean he was free of his sins. But this was the only way he could try to atone. Reaching this conclusion, the environment around him shifted. This time, he promised that in this world he would not give up no matter what. A system notification appeared. He had gained a small territory. Outside, many were injured. The focus now was on helping them. The mage used one of his many spells. Ethereal hands appeared, glowing with a warm yellow light. They began treating the wounded. Once the treatment for one soldier was complete, the mage told him to rest. Looking to the side, the mage noticed someone approaching. Don had returned from inside the mine, alive and intact. The mage had been deeply worried. Looking closer, he noticed something different about Don. He immediately asked if Don had obtained the small territory. As expected from the elder mage, he noticed it right away. When Don woke up, it felt as though he had unlocked a new sense. All of his attributes except for strength had increased by 1 point. His proficiency and abilities had also improved. He suspected what might have caused this. It had something to do with the message he received before he woke up about the small territory. The elder mage probably knew something about it. Don had many questions, but this wasn't the ideal place. The mage was called away to help more injured people. However, he mentioned that if Don had any questions, he could visit the magical tower whenever he wished. Don agreed. Now his attention turned to the leader of the Silent Company. Gawan was bent over the corpse of his enemy, having fulfilled his vengeance. Beside him, Don noticed a young person, Tommy. It seemed after the sewer incident, it was necessary to acknowledge his tenacity. Don was confident the elder mage would guide Tommy well. Before him on the ground was a mask. Finally, they had put an end to one of the causes of the destruction. Despite this, it was only the beginning. Powerful demons still roamed, as well as witches who manipulated elements, dryads who did not like humans, bloodthirsty vampires, and dragons that existed on a completely different level. They would have to wait for his development, because he would defeat them one by one. With a letter in hand, Don continued walking. Because of his deeds, many commissions were seeking him out. Even important figures were frequenting the tavern, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. It seemed like there were plenty of nuisances for him to deal with. Finally, he arrived at the tavern, which was much more crowded than before. He hadn't expected to become this famous. Sitting at the bar, he ordered a drink. A stranger approached, asking if he was the famous hero of the place. The man kept talking, but Don had no idea who he was. The man complained that none of his requests had been answered and wanted to know if Don's fame had made him forget the city and its people. Leaning in closer, the man told the mercenary to stop playing games, as he had spent a lot of money trying to find him.